First thing, we've got two potentiometers, input jack, capacitor, and a three-way box style pickup selector. So if we're visualizing the guitar, we've got two pickups in this case. Now, pickup is known as a transducer, and what a transducer does is measure change in something. So in the case of a pickup, we've got a magnet surrounded by copper wire, and that creates an electromagnetic field. When we vibrate a guitar string, which is magnetic, over the top of that field, it creates an AC current, or an alternating current, which can be mapped to sound. And essentially, that current travels along the hot wire, which is a shielded wire on the pickup. And if we plug that straight in, if we plugged in the active wire to the active lug on our input jack, and the ground wire from our pickup to the ground wire lug on our input jack, we'd essentially have sound. What the pickup selector does is allow us to pick either the neck, bridge, or a combination of the two pickups. A volume selector is essentially regulating the amount of voltage that passes through it. So if we turn this down, it sends a lot of that voltage to ground. If we turn it right up, none of it's going to ground. In the case of a tone pot, this works slightly differently. We're directing that voltage through this capacitor, which is a filter. And this filter allows high frequencies to pass through quite easily, but doesn't allow low frequencies to pass through. And when this is set up, it's set to ground, which means those high frequencies that pass through go to ground. And that's how we adjust tone. Okay, so moving right along, when it comes to soldering, there's a few basic things we're going to need. For one, we're going to need a soldering iron. Secondly, we're going to need some solder. Third, and what I recommend having on hand, is just a damp rag. A damp sponge like this. And as you get build up on the tip of your soldering iron, just clean it off. Now, when it comes to soldering, unless you've been shown properly, a lot of people tend to treat soldering like they're gluing something together, and soldering is a little different to that. Soldering is more about transferring heat. So what I've got is a very hot iron. Well, it's not hot at the moment, obviously, but when it's turned on, I've got a very hot iron, and the solder likes to stick to that. I tin the point of this iron, which basically means I'm giving it a coating of solder, and the solder is drawn to the heat. So if you've ever soldered before and had trouble, if you bring that soldering iron straight onto the component and try and press solder onto that straight away, what you'll find is the solder doesn't want to come off the iron, because the corresponding, or the component we're soldering to, is still cold. So you need to preheat that for a few seconds first. And essentially that's what we're doing. We're transferring heat. Once that next component's hot enough, we hold the solder over it and keep our tip against it, and it will just allow us to melt a little bit of that solder and complete that connection. Now, the other thing that's important is tinning. So I've already talked about tinning the tip of your iron. You also need to tin the lugs you're going to be connecting to, which means just putting a very light coating of solder on each of them, and also the wires you'll be connecting to as well.